Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of the post game show here on the Cold Front Report. I'm Clayton Garrett. Joining me as usual is Travis Blakesley. Travis, how you doing tonight, man?
Hey, AFC East champs again. It's good to be back in the driver's seat. Although it was an interesting way to get there, but we'll talk about it.
Yeah, we have plenty to talk about. The Bills clinched the AFC East. They have the number 3 seed in the AFC playoff standing, and they certainly gave it. They left it a little interesting for about 3.5 quarters until they started to pull away and started to make this one more definitive. But this game was a little weird. The pacing of it was weird. The lack of rhythm of it was weird. It felt like today the Bills got set up on a pedestal to kind of celebrate their division crown for consecutive years in their home stadium. The first time they were able to cap off the AFC East in their own stadium in over 30 years, and it kind of felt like a letdown in a way. Travis, what were your thoughts on today's game in general?
Well, yeah, I mean it didn't go as it seemed like it was heading to, especially after those first two drives. You got that crazy pass that we just saw a still of, another near touchdown from Diggs along the sideline. And then the Bills just couldn't get out in front of themselves. It just seemed like at every, it started with a couple 3-and-outs, some terrible punts, some that got called back and they probably shouldn't have, and we just punted it worse. Just the script all year where it just never seemed like we could play 4 quarters of competent football on the offensive side. And then just just on the adverse side of the defense, it was the same as we've seen all year, just dominance. And I mean, at this point, it's not just a Bills thing. I mean, it clearly is an NFL thing. You see the Colts go down against Jacksonville. We've seen great teams lose to inferior opponents all year round. So I guess, as they say, you just got to get in and then see what happens.
Yeah, and I guess the matter of fact of thing here is that the Bills pulled away and they made this a decisive victory, winning by 17 points. We almost sound a little crazy sitting up here sounding how we're disappointed they only won by 17 today. But the fact of the matter is that the Bills got the job done. The offense was a little stallish, but the defense was dominant throughout the game. I want to start off our talk about the offense and really kind of get both of our thoughts here about what was really going on. Because if you saw that first drive, they were dialed in. Those first two series, we were talking about it before we came live, and the first two series, they were just dialed in. It seemed like they couldn't really be stopped in those first two drives. They were really feeding Diggs the ball, trying to get him his bonus incentive, and the offense was kind of humming. They were moving the ball, and then they went 3 for 4 on their first 4 third downs, and then it was pretty much sayonara from there. They really did not execute quite well in that situation for the rest of the game. On their third downs, the Jets defense was really getting off the field with consistency and forcing the punts, which we will talk about the lackluster special teams execution today by Matt Hawk. And but turning the page back to the offense was really kind of it wasn't moving anywhere. A lot of incompletions, a lot of miscommunications. It looked like the offense was just out of sync, in my opinion. Travis, what were your thoughts on the struggles in the Bills passing game today specifically?
It was interesting because it wasn't just like one thing. I mean, you go back to the Jacksonville game where we couldn't pass protect, and everything kind of rolled off and stemmed off of that, where you saw multiple different issues on just about every drive after those first two. I mean, you had the 3 straight 3-and-outs. Well, actually, you had the turnover on downs after you block a punt, I believe, or maybe, yeah, I think we turned the
Yeah,
ball
you're
over on
correct on
downs
that.
after that. And then 3 straight 3-and-outs. And then we come out at halftime and there were 3 plays in a row after moving the chains where the receiver was nowhere near the ball. Like you mentioned, complete miscommunications. And we hardly ever see that. I mean, every once in a while, I know they run a lot of option routes, so it's going to happen, but just 3 plays in a row. I don't know if they were adding in a wrinkle coming out of the half, but it was frustrating to watch. I mean, I can't lie. I wasn't concerned about losing the game per se, but it's just you want to finish the season, at least as a fan and somebody watches it. You want to finish strong. You know, maybe you take some of it into the playoffs. Maybe that's just for us to speculate and talk about. But you kind of want to see that. whether it was last year where we were able to win the East, I believe against the Broncos, and we totally dismantled them, or even the last game of the season last year where we destroyed Miami. It feels good to go in the playoffs after that. So it was a little anticlimactic, but I guess the silver lining is those last two drives look good, and the offense was able to kind of put it together. I mean, the run game looked good at parts, and then we've abandoned it. It was another interesting script by Dable, to say the least.
And I'm kind of glad you brought that up there at the end of your point, because that's really why I feel like we saw kind of the struggle that we did today for the duration of time that we did. It was pretty much the entirety of the third quarter and then a drive or two into the fourth that this offense really couldn't get much of anything going for itself. And the offense really, you saw a good dose of Devin Singletary today, and you saw him running the ball pretty well. The Bills ran the ball extraordinarily well against the Jets today. It's another game where you see Devin Singletary have a touchdown, get his workload of touches, and this offense look efficient when they're keeping it on the ground. But then again, there's times where the passing offense and the running and the rushing game needs to kind of merge and work as one and work efficiently with synergy. That's how you coordinate an offense, folks. And that just doesn't click. That doesn't get put together today. We've seen instances where the rushing attack and the passing attack click all together, and this offense hums in synergy, and it's awesome to watch. But on days like today, where they really didn't have any rhythm going in any facet whatsoever, whether it was in the passing game where they were having miscommunications on those option routes like you touched on, or in the rushing game where the lanes were easy and often to find, or easy to find early and often, but sometimes down the stretch when he has just a pile to dig his head into and take the loss and get to the line of scrimmage, it is what it is. You can't abandon the running game because of those sort of plays, and we've criticized Brian Dable in the past for doing just that, so I can't do that here. I liked how they kept the ball on the ground today, but I feel like it was due to the lack of execution in the passing game as to why we felt it was so inefficient, so ineffective, and like it was just kind of bleh. Like the offense didn't have many rhythm. They didn't, you were talking about how the Bills looked extraordinarily well against the Dolphins last year in this position where it's the end of the season, you're home. The Bills had already won the division at that point. They already had their spot. I believe Allen came out for a series and the starters came out for a series, and that was it. And then after that point, the Bills laid it onto the Dolphins and they blew them out. It was a huge ending to the season and a great wave of momentum, if you will. And like you said, whether that's just more of a thing for fans to talk about or people like us to talk about, that's not really our perspective to know. But at the same time, you'd like to see this offense clicking on all cylinders heading in the playoffs. And today it just wasn't that.
Yeah. And I mean, like you mentioned early, how many times have we said that after a game? It seems like just about every week. And I don't know. It's interesting. And to delve further into the run game issue, those three and outs, I think we ran the ball on first down on all of those drives, and it wasn't successful. So it's like this team, if we don't get that initial first down, that's where we see these lulls, and that second and into the third quarter was just that, where even if we did get a first down, we saw the illegal block by Bates, which brought back a McKenzie run after a big first down prior to that. So that killed that drive. You saw a couple holding penalties, ill-timed holding penalties on runs that accrued first downs. And it was interesting. I really believe that this run game gets going when this offense is able to pick up a couple first downs through the air. And it doesn't have to be those intermediate routes. It just, we saw a lot of those short passes to Diggs early on, and they were very successful. I mean, when he had the ball in his hand, he was getting yards after catch. Gabriel Davis, for whatever reason, if he was in good position, Josh Allen overthrew the ball. If Josh Allen put the ball on the money, he dropped it or he stepped out of bounds. So it was just, there was small miscues, but it kind of proved to be the factor on many plays, and it was frustrating.
I mean, yeah, you touched on at the beginning of your point how many times we sit here and say something like the Bills getting an ugly win where they won by 17 points, but it feels like they left almost another 30 on the field, doesn't it? With between all of the stalled drives, all of the errant passes, all of the miscues and misexecuted plays. And that's the frustrating yet so optimistic thing about this offense is that they leave points on the board a lot of times in these situations where like I said earlier, they started the game 3 for 4 on third down, and then the rest of the game it wasn't really all that efficient or effective in those situations. And I understand you're playing the Jets today, and it's the end of the season, and you're really kind of wrapping things up. But I don't really like seeing those things heading into the playoffs, and I don't think that's very reassuring to anybody. But the matter of fact is that the Bills got the job done today, and the only like I said in the comments here, question the best match to the Bills, Chargers, or Raiders. That's really there's a lot of conversation as to what the future holds for the Bills going next week. It's not the Raiders, excuse me,
Patriots.
it's the Chargers or the
Patriots and
Patriots,
the
right?
Chargers.
Yeah,
Correct.
it's the Patriots or the Chargers that the Bills are going to match up with next week. And I personally, I'll take either of those. But like I said a couple of weeks ago here on the show, I'd love to see the Patriot matchup again. But like we're saying here, there wasn't much positives to be found for this Bills offense aside from that first drive where Allen found Diggs for the touchdown on quite a unique play that looked really it was really talented. It was quite a play made by Allen and Diggs both to get that for a touchdown. But I want to talk about the defense and then we'll turn page to the special teams and talk about Matt Hawk and what we think is going to go on here in the future. But the defense today, the pass rush, the secondary, they were lights out from front to back. The defense did what it's designed to do. They got pressure with the front four. They were running some exotic blitzes. Jordan Poyer had 2 sacks on the day. But the defense was lights out today playing the Jets. They did their job. They look championship and playoff football ready. Travis, what were your thoughts on how the defense performed today against the Jets?
Well, I think it was probably their best performance. I mean, 9 sacks, nothing through the air. I mean, they completed one third down conversion all game. I kind of felt bad for Zach Wilson out there because clearly he's not ready to play. You're going against a defensive mind that just preys on those young quarterbacks. So, it was good to see them hold us in the game. They were making plays. They didn't stop making plays, even when you get that 8-yard punt to the 25-yard line. They're able to hold them to a field goal, almost took them out of field goal range. So, Ed Oliver, like we talk every show. I mean, he nearly took the handoff on that one play. It would have either been a sack, a fumble, or he's getting the ball himself. Phenomenal play by him. Phillips again showing up big in the run game. We saw Hughes really make a difference. Addison, just everybody was kind of all in with getting sacks, like you mentioned, Poyer as well. So, there's really the one thing that this defense has done consistently all year. They may not have gotten to the quarterback all year. They may had some lulls when it comes to takeaways. But this is a team that no matter who's on the field, it seems like they play together. And everybody knows what everyone is supposed to be doing. They act, I don't want to beat the word to death as we mentioned it before, the synergy on this defense. It looks like a defensive unit for the most part that has been around with each other for 4 or 5 years. And, it's something that I think could have made last year's team that Super Bowl team. I think that's all we were really missing. We didn't when we need to kind of lean back on them if the offense is having issues getting going. This is a defense that is ready for the challenge. Without a doubt, this is a championship style defense, and in those cold weather games, we're going to get at least one home game. I think that's going to be something to take note. Will we see 30, 40 plus point performances? That's not a given. I mean, as you saw last year, we had some tight games, and that Baltimore game sticks out a lot where it was a cold day and low scoring, and the defense was the ace of spades, if you so to speak. So overall, another fantastic performance, and just really they went out on top. They proved that they're the number 1 overall defense for a reason.
Yeah, that you took the words right out of my mouth. The fact that they're the number 1 defense for a real good reason, and it was funny to watch the post excuse me. It was funny to watch the post game press conference to see just kind of, I wouldn't say it was smug, but how the secondary men such as Hyde and Poyer were acting, being the number one defense. They were just kind of reiterating it with excuse me, with the media, and they were having fun with it. It's just fun to see this defense, this whole team in itself, just have a lot of fun when they're doing the things that they do, when they're flying around. And specifically this defense, the last 6 weeks, they've played pretty good football aside from that New England game. I've enjoyed watching what they've done up front. As far as that Oliver and Harrison Phillips, I think those guys have really kind of turned things around for that defensive line. They've made them they've made them threatening with a defensive line that we hoped would kind of just, make sure the dam doesn't break and hold on for dear life in the run game. Now it's turned into a really attacking front, and a front that's really violent, and teams are really going to have to account for going forward, and they can really make a difference. And we saw it today with I believe what they have 9 or 10 sacks. With the with the 9 sacks that they had today, we saw how violent and tenacious that front can be, and they've been playing that way the last handful of weeks. Ever since really that New England loss, we have really seen this defense that was already really playing fast and physical start playing faster and more physical, and they've taken on this identity, and they've been a really tough unit for any team to score on, for any team to play with. And it's been nothing but great showings, in my opinion. And today was nothing from an exception. I thought that today was one of the better showings of the season. I thought that they had the game they needed to have going into the playoffs. I thought that the defense had the game that I wanted to see the offense also have on their side of the ball. Players such as you said, Ed Oliver continues to be, the best defensive player, the best defensive lineman on this team. He is in the play. He is playing violently. He is getting off the ball quickly, and he is really doing his job along the interior week in and week out. And that is such a great sight to see. And it's really changed the complexity of this defense. As I mentioned, it makes the defense more violent. It makes players like Harrison Phillips, it opens things up for them. And, you really don't see many of those opportunities on the back end with players such as Levi Wallace really stepping up the way they have on the latter portion of this season since Tre'Davious White's gone down. Overall, I'm really pleased with what I saw from the defense today. The question I have
for you, Clayton.
What's that?
Let me give you one. So a lot has been made of, obviously, the Bills not having any Pro Bowlers on defense. Do you think that the overall play of how the team just plays together, and it's never just one guy making all the plays? Do you think that I know a lot of Bills fans think, everyone's out to get the Bills as players and as a team, but do you believe that just the overall, how good this team plays as a unit, do you think that affects the lack of Pro Bowlers?
That nature of pretty much how well they play together as a unit, and no one individual is really the star of this team or of this defense as a unit. I think, yeah, that kind of highlights or epitomizes what you're highlighting there with, the lack of a Pro Bowler, not really having any star players or star power, if you will. But then again, that's the Buffalo nature, isn't it? I understand, like you said, a lot of people always feel like that Bills players are kept out of things such as the Pro Bowl and All Pros, and they're underrated or undermined, if you will, because we're in a smaller market. And, I can't sit here and say that doesn't play a factor, but I can also see the point as to what you're alluding to with the fact of none of these guys are really true stars. None of these guys are really like Tre'Davious White's one of the guys that we talk about all the time being at the top of his position. And then Hyde and Poyer, how much those guys are underrated throughout the league and those ranks that I just spoke of, that's well documented throughout their career here in Buffalo. But aside from those guys, aside from those 3 players, you can't really sit here and say the Bills have any upper echelon players at any position on that defensive side of the ball. I mean, I like Matt Milano. I like Tremaine Edmonds. Both of those guys are solid football players. I think Tremaine Edmonds might grace the surface of a top 10, top 7 linebacker in the NFL. But aside from that, and those 3 guys in the secondary, there's no real upper echelon top talent there. But so I would have to agree that, the fact of the matter is this unit plays extremely well together. They play in cohesion on that side of the ball. They always know what the other 10 players are doing on that side of the ball. And that has a huge impact as to why you could see a number 1 defense in 3 different categories and not have any Pro Bowlers. Whereas with the Colts, you have all these Pro Bowlers, but they didn't even make the playoffs. So that's not always. I've always said that the Pro Bowl doesn't matter until it matters, right? It doesn't matter until the Bills don't have any Pro Bowlers, and then everybody's up in arms. But at the same time,
I think it matters for the players because they get a bonus, but outside of that, it's.
I mean, until they start respecting that game and making it what it used to be, I mean, you couldn't really make it what it used to be now. Looking, if you think about it, so the perspective of things definitely changes, and the perspective of things is definitely subjective and up to people and their opinions. But in my opinion, I think I'd have to agree with you with the fact that this unit playing as well as they do together, and no one really ever setting themselves apart or setting themselves aside. And I will say, if it's anybody that does that or is continuing to do that, it would be Ed Oliver. He's on that track to be one of those players. But at the same time, the fact of the matter is what it is. And I definitely have to agree that plays a part in the lack of Pro Bowlers. Is that the opinion that you have, or are you just throwing that out there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the predominant opinion, where a lot of these other guys, for instance, the Aaron Donald, I mean, he's typically been on, a subpar defense. Like, he's had good guys around him, but, up until the last 2 years or so, he's never been, he's always, him and Ramsey are the face of that defense, and they have the big contracts, they get all the money, they get all the hype. But I do think that there is some truth in the market. It's, if you don't watch football on a consistent basis, you're not going to know who Matt Milano is. It's just, as much as we love him and as well as he plays, and specifically what he does to this type of defense to be able to cover guys, like the things that they do best, I believe you can't really see on tape, meaning the calls we're allowed to go into, nobody voting for the Pro Bowl at home is going to know why Micah Hyde is playing high or is he down in the box last night. They don't understand, the nuances of the game. So that kind of goes unheard. But again, when you get to the All Pro, I think it has a little bit more weight. And then when you get to the top 100 list where these guys are kind of voting for each other, I think that really shows what other people think of them. And that is, your peers and your coaches are what matters the most.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. Oh, excuse me. Yeah, I'd have to agree with you. The Bills defense is really talented. And the one thing that I'm hoping for in the future that would really kind of change the complexity of this defense, as I mentioned earlier, with how Ed Oliver is starting to burst and starting to make plays on a weekly basis. I feel like we've been talking about Ed Oliver here weekly on the show for every single week, just about the entire season. If it's not 12 weeks, then it's 14. And if it's not 14, then it's the last 16. He has had a tremendous season, and he is a player that, in a person's eyes that has been watching him every play and has been like, okay, well, let's see what Oliver can do. Because that was the biggest question coming into this season, right? On the defensive line, in many of our eyes, is that Oliver going to break out of his shell? And, he's certainly broken out of his shell this year. And I wouldn't say he's exceeded expectations, but he certainly met them for me. And, this defensive line would certainly change in the same way it's changing without Oliver being as dynamic as he's been. If they were to have an edge rusher of that caliber as well, if a player such as Gregory Rousseau were to develop into a franchise type edge rusher such as Danielle Hunter, players like that make a huge impact on defensive lines and what you could do schematically and what offenses have to do schematically to try and beat those type of players. One player that I saw a lot of burst from today, a lot of energy from today, and you never know. I mean, it's a player that quite frankly, this week I was pondering a lot how much I really wish I saw more of AJ Epinesa this season. And AJ Epinesa, he was playing, I believe he got a sack. Yeah, he came away with a sack today, and he was playing with a lot of juice. And going forward, with Mario Addison and with Jerry Hughes really looking like they're on their way out, being older players on only, I mean, they can re-sign Jerry Hughes for a 1-year deal, but I wouldn't do it. With the appearance of the defensive end rotation looking like it's going to be Boogie, Gregory Rousseau, and then AJ Epinesa and whoever else they may bring in the future, those three guys are definitely going to be here next season, and they're definitely going to have more key roles in this defense than they had this year. Those are two players that you should definitely keep your eyes on this offseason to see how much they're training, to see what they're doing in the offseason, and also just to watch them break out next year. I think those two players, specifically Boogie and AJ Epinesa, it was unfortunate for me how the lack of snaps that they got. You saw Boogie come away with a sack today as well. it was kind of disappointing to me seeing how the lack of snaps that they got this year. I think it hinders their development in a way when you have older guys on the roster such as Jerry Hughes and Mario Addison, which they've talked about Mario Addison being an elder statesman numerous times before in the times of OTAs and training camp. During that time of year, they were talking a lot about what Mario Addison does to help those younger players, and to not see them really kind of get that push in the latter portion of 2021. I don't know. That kind of confuses me. That kind of leaves me a little frustrated with some of the decision making, whether it be coaching as well as hand in hand with general managers. That kind of stuff bothers me. It's a little bothersome to me. But those three players, I'm quite excited for what those three can bring in the future, and hoping that they can develop to the same way that Ed Oliver did this past season. But changing the page here to really the special teams, which kind of was the star and then not the star of the show at the same time today, as they started things off with a block punt, which was the first block punt since 2016, which that was kind of surprising to see. I think it was if it wasn't last week, it was 2 weeks ago. I said to you, Travis, that I was wondering how long it's going to take for this unit to get a block punt. They've gotten close a couple times, but they finally got through today.
They did. I believe Cam Lewis was unblocked, and I do think that they were sending a little bit more pressure than they were normally. And, maybe, again, when you already know you're going to make the playoffs, obviously you have something to play for, but you're able to experiment a little bit. I think that's why you saw Isaiah McKenzie out there for the first couple punts, and one was muffed and the other one he picked up in a questionable situation. And I just think, McDermott doesn't want that chance. He doesn't want the roll of the dice where he can take it the distance, but he can also, muff it, fumble it, what have you. The block punt was great. You have mentioned we've gotten close, and there was a couple times later on in the game where we were right there as well. But yeah, it's from the good to the bad, and we can kind of transition to that. I mean, I guess Matt Hawk is a holder who was forced to learn how to punt a football, and when his confidence went, it played out the way you see a lot of kickers, who get in the doghouse, who get released the next day, which is not going to happen now. But that's the type of performance that you see where you have a shanked punt, you get kind of lucky because I believe that personal foul, the offsetting, that kind of happened after the play. So I don't even think they should have been able to re-kick that one. And then he kicks it even worse. And then it just goes downhill from there. So, having the 2 weeks off from punting, it kind of showed. I'm sure that has nothing to do with it, but let's hope that we don't find ourselves in a crucial situation where we need to flip the field position. Because, we there was the one time where we could afford a short punt and he booms it into the end zone, and you hear the crowd roar because he finally kicked it past 25 yards.
Yeah, it was kind of ridiculous. I don't think I really have a hard time trying to remember any kind of punting showing that was more miserable in a Bills uniform than today. I mean, that was pretty rough for Matt Hawk. And we were talking before we went live, and you had brought up the fact of the matter is that the Miami Dolphins, ever since Matt Hawk, their glorified punting holder, how they went from best in field goal percentage to worst in field goal percentage. And here you have Tyler Bass, who it was pretty well renowned as to how bad Corey Bojorquez was at holding the ball for Tyler Bass on PATs and field goals. He had missed a couple of them because of Corey Bojorquez and giving him laces, and those things aren't too advantageous for a kicker, but they're not of his control, and he missed kicks because of it. And they can't afford that. So Matt Hawk coming here and having Tyler Bass kind of speak as to how good of a holder he has this year, that's kind of really, honestly, you have to think at this point, the only thing keeping him on this roster, because they have Jamie Gilliam, the Swedish Hammer, who was a punter for the Browns I believe last year, if not that, the year before, who has a monster leg, kind of the same issue, kind of the same deal that you're dealing with Bojorquez, a guy who has a really strong leg, can punt it far, but kind of lacks that finesse and difficulty controlling the ball and coffin corner kicking, as many Bills fans know, with players infamous such as Brian Moorman, who made the coffin corner, pretty infamous. And the punting today was just it was gross. Like you talked about, How they got to re-kick, I was kind of I agreed with you. I didn't think the Bills should have been able to re-kick that one, but they did. And it turns out being only a net of 21 yards, where the defense has to take over in Jets territory. I believe that's the one that they ended up scoring a 40-yard touchdown on with Keelan Cole as well. So that, yeah, it was. So that the Matt Hawk and his lack of punting ability today, that was just, it was strange to me. You hit the nail right on the head when you say it reminded you of when you see kickers kind of just shut down and really kind of just fall apart mid game. Today was not an exception for Matt Hawk. It was just like that. And it was strange. You see him shank 2 kicks that are consecutively, one that counts, one that doesn't. And then after that, he drops the ball, and it's pretty much he's back there, and the Sharks smell blood in the water. In instances such as that, I'm just happy to see the punter get away healthy, because those punters aren't used to taking hits. They aren't used to carrying the football. They're used to holding the football and kicking it. And that's never good when you have your punters scrambling around back there as a ball carrier, and you have guys that are on special teams who are in those positions to block kicks and make plays, who are ready to take his head off. That a lot more times than not, you see punters get hurt, and I was happy to see him get out of there healthy. But he really needs to be better here in this playoff stretch. I know we've talked about before how bad, or not necessarily how bad he's been, but we've seen kind of his noodle leg before. We've seen him punt from his end zone and barely get it to midfield, or barely get it to the Bills 40-yard line. And that's been a topic of discussion before. But he can't shut down like he did today. If you have that play where you drop the ball on a snap, that it wasn't even that bad of a snap. If anything, you could say it was a little to his left. But I mean, I must comment that it wasn't on the numbers, but it wasn't some snap that he had to do an acrobatic to try and catch or field or anything of that nature. It was literally right to his gut. He had to move his hand a little bit, and he dropped it. It seemed like the punter had cold hands. And, I'm not sure how many people in the comments are watching have tried to handle a cold football in a cold game when it was sub 20 degrees at that point in the game, and wind chill is making it probably, somewhere in the teens, maybe in the single digits. If he's just kind of been sulking on the sideline and he has some brick hard hands, if that ball hits his hands, he's probably going to drop it. So I wouldn't say that is necessary. I wouldn't really necessarily rule that out.
He's probably thinking of the kick, and it's like the receiver who looks upfield before he catches the ball. I mean, he's probably thinking about how can I not shank this one, and you mess up on the easy things. But just to interject real quick, yeah, you're playing the Jets. This won't cost you, but this type of performance will cost you in the playoffs.
Oh yeah, 21.
If you're on this side of the 50, you can't go for it. When a kicker's having a bad game, you can just say screw it. When we get into the field goal range, we're going for it. If you go 3 and out 3 times in a row, you got to punt the ball.
Yeah, you're going to put your team into some pretty drastic situations if you're unable to punt the ball and trade possession. You think about it, 21 yards net on a punt. Josh Allen's throwing it further. We've turned the ball over better on interceptions, on almost fumbles. Like it's crazy to think about, where you were sitting there. I believe it was honestly 3rd and 6 or 3rd and 5. It was 3rd and medium. It wasn't 3rd and beyond 10, maybe. Not the first one. The second one, the one he dropped was 3rd and medium. The next punt, when it was 3rd and 13, he was able to get. 4th and 13. He was able to get a good punt away. But you can't have that in playoff games. You can't have 21 yards net. That's equating to a turnover at that point. And turning the ball over, it's not going to be a turnover on the stat sheet, but that's not good. That is not putting your team in a position to win. Thankfully, the Bills are fortunate to have a pretty good defense. They did crack in that position after a 21-yard punt, and they allowed their only, I believe, the only touchdown they allowed today. It was the only touchdown they allowed today, and that's just that's inexcusable. But at the same time, you have to look at the yin and yang here, and the positive of that, he's a good holder, and that's really the only thing that's going to keep him on this team tomorrow. That's really the only reason the Bills aren't or haven't really taken flyers for punters before. We've been saying they needed to take flyers since mid-season. The fact of the matter is the Bills want a holder that their kicker is secure.
They didn't even have a competition.
Yeah,
they signed him 3 years, no competition.
And it's just, they can get out of that. We were talking about this before we came live. They can get out of that 3-year contract after this year, but it's still like it still just leaves you scratching your head. And that that is going to be something, just as Cody Wells says, special teams are going to watch this film and come for him in the playoffs. See, that is the biggest problem is, we have a deer in the headlights punter back there.
Could you imagine New England watching that?
Yeah.
Talk about blood in the water.
Yeah, blood in the water. The Patriots are the team that I'm pretty sure four of the last 6 games that the Bills have played the Patriots, they blocked a punt. So that's not really anything that I like joking around about, especially since, there's pretty much a 50% chance that the Bills play the Patriots next week. And, if it's any team that are going to take advantage of the Bills on special teams, it's going to be the Patriots. But I wanted to talk about the return game today because you've been talking about it for weeks. The Bills potentially sending Micah Hyde back there just to fair catch the kick. They finally did it today. And listening to him talk about fielding the punts in the wind in Buffalo, it was fun to listen to. He said, "I'm not playing that today," and he'd let it bounce and field the kick. But you made a good point talking about how they're not really playing around with the turnovers. They're not really playing around with the muffs. And after last week's lack of execution by Marquez Stevenson, you see him deactivated, and then you see McKenzie out there for the first punt. He catches it, he fields it all right, but then the second one, he kind of bobbles, and it's not necessarily a fumble, but it's just enough to make Sean McDermott uneasy enough to pull him out of the game and put Micah Hyde back there. And honestly, you saw a pretty good designed return there by the return team with Micah Hyde back there. Is it something that every team really wants to do, to send one of their best defensive players out there to field kicks because Isaiah McKenzie or this guy or that guy can't field them and you're insecure about it? No, it's not ideal necessarily, but are you going to have possession of the football? Is that something you're definitely going to have? Do you feel more secure with him back there? Yeah, that is worth it, in my opinion. The trade-off at that point in time, it's entirely worth it. Doing it at this point in the season, it kind of makes sense. They're pretty much done playing around with trying to figure out who the quote unquote return specialist or the fielding specialist is going to be for punts and kicks. I'm not sure what they're going to, I believe they still have McKenzie back there on kickoffs. I mean, half the time they're kicking him out of the end zone, so it doesn't really make a difference at that point anyways. But for punts, it seems like going forward, they may keep Hyde back there. Today was the first time we saw it, and kind of going into the more critical portion of the season, obviously with the playoffs, I kind of expect them to keep Hyde back there, and I hope they do too, because he did a pretty good job today.
Yeah, I can pretty much guarantee that that's going to be the thought process. Like you hit the nail right on the head perfectly. McDermott's not messing around. He certainly is not going to mess around with losing a possession in the playoffs. And like you said, Micah Hyde, although not traditional, there's 3 or 4 punts that were picked up off the ground on bounce, but he got 5 yards, he got 12 yards. So that's all I'm looking for. And I think people mentioning in the comments, Andre Roberts, well, he's not on the team anymore. And I don't think that this can be addressed this season. I think you just have to go with Hyde back there. And as you mentioned, McKenzie and Breida, I believe, were in the kickoff return roll with them on that side. We just don't really have a returner who's comfortable fielding the punts. I trust McKenzie once the ball's in his hand. Like if he had a magnet and the ball went right straight to his hands, I'd throw him out there all the time because I like what he does with the ball in his hands. And outside of the muffs, I think he protects the ball well for a little guy. But yeah, I don't mess around anymore. Either fair catch it. And the one thing about Micah Hyde, as you notice, is he doesn't get blown up. He's getting what he can and he's getting down. He knows he's a star on defense and he can't afford to get hurt, where you see McKenzie get whacked sometimes.
Yeah. And that's really the big thing. You're in a vulnerable position, and players knowing how to protect themselves is a big time part of that playing that position, and protecting themselves and protecting the ball. Because if you're not protecting yourself, you're not protecting the ball in a way. But it was an all right game today. Kind of the lack of rhythm on offense really kind of shook things up, but still nonetheless a 27-10 victory over the Jets to clinch the AFC East. 17-point victory at home is a big time thing. Going into playoffs, as we said earlier, they're either playing the Chargers or the Patriots. One thing that I want to talk about, and it has everything to do with the Bills and Jets, actually. It's a former player of both teams. I want to see, Travis, do you think the Bills are going to bring Shaq Lawson in this week?
I don't know if they are, but I would really like to see it. It's a crowded room. It'd be I'd be curious to see who would be, removed from the roster. They got to get rid of somebody, and you think it'd be somebody on the defensive line because they have, like a, I don't know, a fifth of the team, a quarter of the team is in that defensive line position. But yeah, I mean, I think he's the type of guy who obviously knows the system. He's a big time run defender, and although their run defense was fantastic today, and
Mhm.
it's been good all season outside of a handful of runs that you can cherry pick. I think he's the type of guy who can set the edge. He can get a little bit of pass rush. You're just going to kind of have to accept that a guy like Boogie Basham is probably not going to be activated for the rest of the year if that were the case. But I think if they don't get him now, I think he definitely returns to the Bills for a short contract and kind of a prove it deal to show that he's still going, because this will be his, he's been on 3 teams in 3 years. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yep.
So we wanted to sign him at that $10 million mark a year. We could get him for substantially less next year. And, I don't think his performance would go down really. I just think he was in a good spot here. You kind of end up chasing the money and you don't know what you got until it's gone. And I think that's what he has done in Miami and in the New York Jets.
And let's not forget, really, with Shaq Lawson, it took him a couple years to really figure out his fit in this defense, too. Let's not forget, it took him a couple times, or excuse me, a couple years to really kind of mature in it with his coaching staff. Let's not forget, he was a first round pick of Rex Ryan, of that former regime. And at the end of the day, when he was still on this football team, he was the last player that was signed or drafted by that regime aside from Jerry Hughes. So one of two players that and overall the last draft pick. That's kind of the biggest thing that I highlighted there. And like you said, 3 teams in 3 years. And when he left, I really felt like that was going to be one of the things he struggled with the most was finding a fit into a team. He signed with Miami, and that's a team that runs quite a hybrid look that likes 3-4, that likes 4-3. They run variances of fronts, and then he didn't really find his fit there. So then he got moved over to Houston, and he couldn't really find his fit there either. And then he goes, to New York, and he's kind of a misfit. If you see a trend here, it took him a couple years to figure it out in Buffalo, and he kind of bounced around 3 different teams within a year. And his value has decreased tremendously, as you said. But I wouldn't necessarily. We're not sitting here talking about an injured Shaq Lawson like we were when he first came to Buffalo. We were talking about the shoulder, when he couldn't really produce, when his development wasn't really necessarily existent because of the shoulder injury. It was hindering him. We're not talking about a hindered Shaq Lawson. We're talking about a misfitted Shaq Lawson. We're talking about a Shaq Lawson who's kind of relatively fresh. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say like I know everything about Shaq Lawson's health and whether he, is nursing anything. But to the extent of my knowledge, he's not. And he looks like he needs a home. And I know one thing I know matter of factly is that he would love to come back to Buffalo. He would love to come home to Buffalo. And he would definitely sign back here. If the Bills called him, he would answer immediately and he would be on a flight pretty much just like that. Like you said, pretty much the biggest thing. At this point, they could sign to a practice squad deal. They can bring him onto this practice squad, and that I think would be the most advantageous. Do I know if people would necessarily pick him off the practice squad during the playoffs? I don't really know the rules around that. I mean, are teams allowed to poach people's practice squads during the playoffs?
I believe you can protect the same way.
Yeah, he would
But
be
yeah,
protected.
yeah. The interesting thing is if he clears waivers, I guess, is he going to be a guy that you can kind of pick up for the vet minimum?
Mhm.
And then also it goes in, that's when it's into his hands. There's some guys who may have too big of an ego, say, I don't want to be a practice squad player. And then there's guys who say, hey, I want to go on a Super Bowl run. So you put me on the practice squad, activate or elevate me when need be, and, try to collect a ring.
Yeah. And as far as, his fit here and what he'd really do, I agree with you that you'd pretty much deactivate Boogie Basham for the rest of the season. But, I feel like, Boogie's spot is more so along the lines of either Jerry Hughes or Mario Addison's spot versus, Shaq would come in and replace Boogie Basham because Boogie's been a fringe active or inactive player for pretty much the entirety of the season. And I think a player such as you may have Vernon Butler still active. But between him and Ankau, I didn't really see the benefit of activating him in favor of Ankau. Ankau didn't have the best game last week, but he didn't have the worst game. But at the same time, I think I would be all in favor of what Shaq Lawson would bring to this defense. I think he sets an incredible edge in the run game. I think he is everything that this defensive front has really kind of epitomized and embodied in this defense, being tenacious, aggressive. I think he'd fit right in. And, I think he'd be a perfect part of the rotation next year. Of the three players that I mentioned earlier with Epinesa, Rousseau, and Boogie Basham, you could throw Shaq Lawson's name in there, and I'd be perfectly comfortable with him being thrown into that rotation as well. So I'm all on board with Shaq Lawson being re-signed to the Bills. You can say what you will about the money and whether it's a practice squad spot. I think that the Bills defense would be better with Shaq Lawson on the roster going into the playoffs than they are without him. Whether if they don't sign him, I don't think it's going to be the death of this defense, but they could certainly use a player of his skill set. That's for sure.
Yeah, they'll definitely be better with Shaq Lawson. He knows the guys. He's actually, the big good point that you brought up is he was the only guy left over for the Rex Ryan era. We all know Rex Ryan. The type of ship he runs is antithetical to Sean McDermott. So some of these guys, we bring up James Mallory talking about there's plenty of guys in the NFL who don't love the game of football, but they play to get a paycheck. I think that embodies the Rex Ryan mentality, where if you're not winning, it's a paycheck. Where Shaq had to do some soul searching, and I think he really to stay and to get an offer that he did, I think proved that he made that transition mentally. He grew up as a player, former first-round draft pick that really didn't make a lot of noise, came in injured. He changed his career a bit, and he got a big contract off of it. I think you're right. I think he'll want to come back here. All the guys, they love him, and he was an impact player, and I think his role was perfect, a little perfect carved out role. You go against the Tennessee Titans, you're going to want a defensive end like him who can play the run.
Absolutely. I'd be all for Shaq Lawson coming back to Buffalo. But with that being said, we've reached the end of our show. I want to thank everybody for sticking with us in the comments and all the viewers watching throughout the show. One thing's for sure, you can find both of our handles in the description below. You can find the links to our Twitter pages, and you can click them and go follow us. Travis, can you tell people where they can find you and what they have to look forward to if they do?
Well, you can find me on Twitter at Trav Blakesley. You can find me every Friday for the Friday Night Forecast. For as long as we're playing, we'll keep running the show. If for whatever reason we end up exiting early, we'll have shows depending on what's going around in news for the Bills. But check us out there every Friday night around 8:30.
Yeah, there's always plenty going on here at the Cold Front Report. Be sure to follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and like our Facebook page. That's at Cold Front Report _Bills News on Instagram and at Cold Front Report on Twitter, as you can see on the bottom of your screen. You can also find those handles in the description below on YouTube and Facebook. If you'd like to find me, I'm on Twitter at CFR Clayton. I always love discussing. I always love talking about the Bills. Not really active when they're not playing, but if you want to talk about the Bills, I'm more than happy to. It's always fun coming live here. It's always more fun coming off of a win, especially division clinching win and the win before going into the playoffs. So next week's show is definitely going to be an exciting one. There's going to be plenty to talk about. I want to thank everybody for their time. I want to thank you guys for watching and listening and staying tuned to the post-game show here on the Cold Front Report. And I hope you stay tuned next week when we go live after the game. We'll know more pretty much after the times and dates are announced for when the Bills are going to play whoever it is they're going to play, whether it's the Chargers or the Patriots. With that, thank you everybody for watching. Stay safe, stay healthy, and go Bills.